chapter 13, always begin from the people angle. Appeal to the ego. Although I tend to think of myself as quite an analytical and structured person, I'll be the first to admit that sometimes I use that as a cover for how I'm really feeling. Sometimes, when I'm debating with someone about some religious or political topic, I dig in my heels and draw battle lines around a position because I've already gone too far down a path to change course. Admitting that I was wrong was no longer a viable option. When we're fixated on an object, a person, a method, or a thought, in other words, anything, our ability to handle situations becomes extremely limited. We get tunnel vision. We're too absorbed in our thinking and our vision narrows. We lose the ability to see new opportunities and change. In 1999, Daniel Simons and Christopher Chabris conducted their famous selected attention test, or the invisible gorilla test, where they had volunteers watch a video of two groups of people passing basketballs around. The volunteers were asked to count the number of passes between the players. There were players dressed in both black and white shirts, and the volunteers were instructed to ignore the passes of the players dressed in black. Halfway through the video, a person dressed in a large gorilla suit walked through the middle of the group, does a short dance, and strolls away. Surprisingly, most volunteers didn't notice the gorilla because they were too busy trying to count the number of passes. Simons called this intentional blindness, where it becomes easy for a person to miss the details their minds weren't attuned to look for. We can be so focused on what we want to see that we lose touch with everything else, Simon said. Although people do still try to rationalize why they missed the gorilla, it's hard to explain such a failure of awareness without confronting the possibility that we are aware of far less of our world than we think. Sun Tzu believed that people were mostly emotional creatures. Most of us learn to reason and act as though we're completely rational and logical, but truthfully told, our underlying emotions drive more of our behavior than we want to believe. Professor Albert Mehabian found in the 1950s that body language accounted for 55% of communication, while words, content contributed only 7% of communication, tone of voice was the other 38%. This is not to say that we should give up entirely on trying to be logical and reasonable, but it does mean that we should try to reach out to people's egos and not only their minds. Our ego is what makes us who we are. Don't let the ego run the show, but don't pretend that it's not there. Unfortunately, most people don't know how to communicate effectively. They rely too much on their words and believe that with enough reasoning they can force their view onto others. The people on the receiving end may nod in agreement, but really they're only being polite. Most people will learn from how you act rather than what you say or how you speak. People will try to emulate your actions. Unfortunately, for aspiring leaders, this means behaving appropriately most of the time, and not only when you feel confident or motivated. In fact, how you act matters more when you're under stress or feeling threatened. These are the moments when your leadership will matter the most. How will you inspire others when you don't feel inspired yourself? How will you take the lead when others are too timid to step forward? Yeah, this will feel scary. It'll feel like you're in the spotlight all the time. And you will be. There's no way around it. So why wouldn't you try to get ahead of it? Take your goddamn timidity and dispose of it? Just kidding. But seriously, though, get used to being in the spotlight. Take every opportunity to take the spotlight. You'll eventually realize that it's not quite as scary as what your mind makes it out to be. Human nature is fickle. Jeff Bezos apparently said that changing your mind often was a sign of high intelligence. While I'm not sure I would necessarily agree with Jeff, sometimes people do it a little too often. It does reinforce Sun Tzu's view that people are dangerously fickle. Humans can be like animals, perfectly calm 1 second, then turning on you suddenly and dangerously without notice. In ancient China, there was an unwritten rule that emperors would not execute anyone who had helped them to establish the kingdom. It was a way of protecting people who had fought by their side, and it incentivized people to follow these heroes without reservations about their future. In the 3,000-year history of China, there were only a handful of rulers that violated this expectation. Dirty soldiers must stand at the back. In the spring and autumn period, Duke Wen was exiled from his dynasty for more than 20 years. During that time, his uncle, Huyan, continued to support and strategize for him from the outside until Huyan was successful in paving the way for Wen to return as ruler. On the day of his return, as Duke Wen was about to enter the city, he gave an interesting command to his troops. Soldiers who looked scruffy and dark with dirty hands and feet should stand at the back. Because the Duke had been away for so long, he wanted his first moment to be as perfect and as magnificent as possible. The Duke, of course, didn't think about why his soldiers looked dirty and scruffy in the first place. These were the soldiers that sacrificed the most for him through their hard work and toil. Seeing how the Duke treated his troops, Huyan didn't want to follow him any longer. Han Yu said, "I stuck by you while you were in exile for over 2 decades. I feel ashamed of the indecent and ghastly acts that I have done. Like those soldiers, I am tainted with the memories of these acts that I don't want to remember or tell others." To his credit, Duke Wen understood his uncle's worry and immediately pledged that he would never treat his uncle poorly. He drew his sword, pointed at a log of firewood on the floor, and chopped it in two, saying that his fate would be like that of the wood if he ever broke his word. Huyan was wise in trying to protect himself from the fickle nature of humans. When times are tough, camaraderie comes easily. It's easy to share stories, sing songs, and think about how we're all making sacrifices to create a better world. We respect each other and are thankful for the actions that others have taken. But the tide turns quite quickly when the good times come on. Instead of being thankful for what others do, we're jealous. We're jealous because we think that we're not as smart as they are, or we're not as cunning as they are. We don't want to look stupid or foolish. This is as true today as it was 2,000 years ago. When Gujin was away from his kingdom as a slave of Fushai, he left the administration of his kingdom to his advisor Wenzhong. But when he returned, he forced Wenzhong to commit suicide. He told him unapologetically, "I am very grateful to you for helping me reclaim my kingdom. You are a great and wise strategist, but now my dead father needs you more." When times were tough, Wu Jin needed Wenzhong's help, but once he regained his power, Gojin felt threatened and needed to remove him. Gujin no longer had any external enemies, and he became afraid of the people on the inside. If Gujin wasn't blinded by fear, he would have easily realized that if Wenzhong wanted to claim the kingdom for himself, he could have. He had many opportunities in the decade that Gujin was away. In the Taoist text Lazy, there's a story about a young man who had birds as his friends. Every day, he would sit near the shore and the birds would land to talk to him. Everyone in the village knew about his bizarre relationship with the birds. "One day," his father said, "everybody talks about your friendship with the birds. How come you have never brought one back to your lonely father, so I may see and play with one?" The next day, the young man went to the shore, wanting to bring one back to his father, but no birds would come. People are like the birds. They'll somehow know what you're thinking and be able to see through to your intentions, even if you try to hide them. So, my personal advice would be for you to know your boundaries. Feel free to help others to the best of your abilities, but don't do anything for them so extreme that you would be afraid to tell others about it. If you help them with things they would not do, they will be the first person to come after you because of the secrets that you know. We determine the good and the bad. It's because of the men and women who work on the farms that we have the fruits of our harvest. When the farmers go out to work on the farm is theirs. It's a shame that Western culture is fixated on the contributions of technology without the same appreciation for the contributions of individuals. Compare this to the East, which flips it around by placing families and people at the center. You could argue that it's been that way since the Zhou dynasty in 1046 B.C., where being the eldest son of a family gave you exclusive rights to land and power. To Sun Tzu, understanding people was the ultimate starting point. If there weren't any people in the world, would there be good or bad? If an earthquake happened on a deserted island, would it matter? No one would be there to suffer the consequences. Life and its variety of events were only to be judged in reference to their impact on people. But what is good and what is bad changes from person to person because our wants and desires are not the same. When China first opened her economy to the modern West, Western companies began establishing offices in China, bringing with them their style of management. One manager, Stuart, led his office the same way as he did in the United States. He was action and outcomes-oriented and constantly gave helpful instructions to his staff on improvement opportunities. Each time the staff made a mistake, no matter the size or impact, Stuart would ignite into flames. One time, someone handed him a report with an incorrect figure. Stuart caught it and asked him for the correct number. It would have only taken an extra few seconds for the staff member to find the correct amount in his notes, but Stuart didn't miss a beat. How could you get something simple so wrong? 3 minutes for everyone in this meeting means a total of 30 minutes wasted. His style of management was hard to stomach, but Stuart didn't care. After all, he was acting in the company's best interests. After a year, most of the original staff from the office had resigned. Some decided to stay as it was difficult for them to find a new job, but they had to learn how to adapt to Stuart's unique management style. In hindsight, although they never would have admitted it, Stuart changed the course of their careers for the better. As they left the company to go on to other ventures, they began to understand the lessons that Stuart had tried to teach them through his rage. He taught them about caution and attention to detail. Why do you think some managers under Stuart were able to adapt and rise to new heights, while others stayed stagnant or chose to run? What was causing the difference? It's because folks see life differently. Our mindset is as unique as our fingerprints. No two people are the same. And at the end of the day, we're the ones who choose how we want to react to life's obstacles. At the end of the day, we can choose to either react positively, absorbing them as learning experiences, or we can choose to react negatively, blaming outcomes on bad luck. But neither choice changes the fact that we always have a choice. How we see life is always our choice to make. Then again, knowing that probably doesn't make it any easier for you. It takes considerable courage and practice before we can take a painful event and convert it into something meaningful and positive. I've personally found it useful to take an interim step. When something you see as bad happens, take a little time out. Don't be too quick to label it definitively as bad. Remind yourself that our foresight is limited and life will need more time to play out completely. I once came across the story of an entrepreneur who wrote in his biography, "When I was younger, I wanted to do my doctorate at a prestigious school. But the first time I applied, I failed. I failed miserably. The second time I applied, I failed again. The second time was worse because I thought that I had a chance of being admitted. Finding out that I didn't make it was like a bucket of ice being thrown over my head. I started to doubt myself. I truly believed that anybody who was ever anybody was highly educated and attended a prestigious school. What was I to do now that I didn't make it? And being the stubborn kid I was, I refused to take the test again. My pride wouldn't let me fail a third time. This was one of the most painful periods in my life." But he continues to describe that in hindsight, this was the biggest turning point in his life. If he had been admitted to the school at the time, he may have been a very successful teacher or professor, but he never would be the great business leader and thinker that he later became. Steve Jobs, in his 2005 commencement speech at Stanford, said, "You can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backward. So you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future. You have to trust in something, your gut, destiny, life, karma, whatever." This approach has never let me down, and it has made all the difference in my life. It's impossible for us to know how we might wind up. And thankfully, it's not our job to know. Our job is to make sure that we're not letting ourselves get defeated by unexpected losses or events. Our job is to keep our head above water so that we can continue swimming, even if it means that we have to tread water for a while. Whether you see something as good or bad is entirely up to you, and remember that it's determined by you and not for you. Start with empathy. In some ways, Sun Tzu's thinking around strategy is deceivingly simple and direct. There was nothing particularly altruistic about his thinking. The principles we spoke about earlier around values, unity, and people come into the equation because he believed the benefits would outweigh the costs. Cost-benefit analysis is what everything in the art of war boils down to, a fact that brings me great joy. When you take a step back to think about it, it makes complete sense. For instance, we love and take care of the people who have faith in us because they're the source of our strength. If we don't treat them well, or if we don't have them bought into our mission, we're limiting our own capability. If unity is what gives us strength, why wouldn't we make it one of our key goals? Sun Tzu also realized, way before the time of modern economists, that people weren't inherently bad or good, they were neutral. But every day, presented with about 24 choices, we are most likely to make choices that favor ourselves. Sun Tzu knew that incentives worked precisely because of this reason. Now, I'm not saying that people are so binary that they behave like pre-programmed machines. Our communities, family, and friends do have an influence on our choices, but it does mean that we need to be clear on where the costs and benefits are for everyone involved. The more we can help people answer the question, what's in it for me? The more momentum, influence, and motivation we'll have behind us. This is where Sun Tzu was centuries ahead of his time. This is empathy. We're using our understanding of another to help the team perform effectively. These days, as humanity runs toward producing goods faster and smarter, there's an overemphasis on the importance of finance, science, and math. We admire people who can prove their intelligence by studying for decades to obtain master's degrees and doctorates. This was not intelligence to Sun Tzu. True intelligence was being able to understand and grasp the nature of people. A beautiful poem isn't one that is written technically well, with perfect structure and language. A beautiful poem is one that is able to transport the reader to another world. A beautiful poem is one that connects to something deep inside of us, something that we've hidden and forgotten about over the years. Cao Cao flees from Zhuge. General, there's a fork up ahead in the road. Which path should we take? The scout asked Cao Cao, riding up to him on his horse. The path on the right looks smoky, like fires have been lit there. The path on the left appears quiet and still. What are your instructions, General? Cao Cao took a moment to think and to catch his breath. He was on the run from Zhuge and had just arrived at the intersection along Failing Road. General, we need your instructions quickly. The road on the right looks small and treacherous. There is likely an ambush there. We should take the road on the left. It is wide and open. Cao Cao shook his head. No, we will take the road on the right. Zhuge is committed to trying to trick me, but I will not fall for it. What is fake is real, and what is real is fake. March right. The army moved to take the smaller path on the right, but they did not get far before they were ambushed and captured. Earlier, Zhuge had ordered his soldiers to get to the intersection first and had instructed his soldiers to light small fires when they got there. But wouldn't this alert the enemy of our position? His soldiers asked. Zhuge replied, You have to know something about Cao Cao. He sees things even when there is nothing there. Even when he shouldn't be thinking about it or looking at it, he can't help himself. When we light the fires for Cao Cao to see, he will think of himself as a great general and won't do what an ordinary person would do. The difference between Cao Cao and Zhuge was that Zhuge was able to place himself in the shoes of Cao Cao to come up with his plan. Cao Cao, on the other hand, saw the world from his own vantage point, even though he was thinking of the same strategy. Empathy is great. The problem, however, is our pesky inner dialogue constantly trying to convince us to do the opposite. There are moments, probably too many moments, where I feel so righteous about my beliefs that I see and hear nobody else. Like when I want to flaunt my knowledge about design or technology. I don't particularly mean to belittle these emotions, as these can be real convictions. But this is precisely what makes empathy harder than it seems. It can be extremely seductive to listen to that voice inside our heads that gives us the justification and permission to act. Don't buy into it so quickly. We can't develop plans in a vacuum, and pretending that you can puts you closer to danger than success. Helmets off! When Emperor Wen first became emperor, he travelled from city to city to get a glimpse of what it would be like to live as a peasant in the country. One day when he arrived at a military camp, he was barred from entering by a soldier. Excuse me, do you know who I am? I am the emperor. I don't care who you are. In this camp we only take orders from the general, the soldier replied. The emperor, having no other way of passing, told the soldier to get permission from the general. When the emperor finally managed to enter the camp, he wrote a letter to his son. In all the lands I've visited, only the lands commanded by Zoyafu seemed sufficiently disciplined and dependable. When you are faced with tough situations in the future, call on this general, as I think he is the only person who will be able to help you. As it turned out, when the emperor's son was later fighting in the rebellion of the 7 states, it was indeed Zoyafu who distinguished himself in helping to squash the rebellion. There is a Chinese expression that says, when a general is away from the capital, there are some orders from the emperor that he knows not to follow. This saying is usually used to describe a great general and army, praising the ability of the leader to be trusted and capable of making their own decisions. But this is not always the case. During the Qing dynasty, many centuries later, a similar event happened when Emperor Yongzheng was returning home victorious alongside his army and valiant General Niangenya. It was a hot and humid day, and the emperor noticed that the soldiers were sweating profusely. He said to the soldier leading his chariot, "Young man, it is so hot today. Please take your helmet off." But the soldier didn't respond. Yongzheng repeated, "Young man, please take your helmet off." This time, the emperor was certain the man had heard him, but again the soldier didn't respond. Yongzheng turned to Niangenya. "Didn't that soldier hear me? It is so hot today. Let us give the soldiers a break and allow them to take their helmets off." General Niangenya nodded and commanded, "Helmets!" And all the soldiers immediately removed their helmets. Niangenya's soldiers were loyal and disciplined, listening only to the command of the general. Normally, this was a mark of a great army. But up close, the emperor didn't see this demonstration as a mark of distinction. He saw it as a threat. He thought, "Today you will command your soldiers to take their helmets off, but the next day it will be my head." Even though Niangenya was a great general, the emperor no longer placed his faith in him. Niangenya was demoted time and time again from all his posts, until he was eventually arrested and granted the privilege of committing suicide. Was Niangenya to blame here? Did he do anything wrong? Well, where he was wrong was in choosing to behave the same way as he always did when the situation didn't warrant it. He chose to put on a display of strength for the emperor, which was taken the wrong way. He didn't stop and question whether Yongzheng was the type to feel empowered from a display of strength like Emperor Wen, or the type of emperor to feel threatened. This mistaken judgment cost Niangenya dearly. Suffice to say that this is my attempt to scare you a little into putting the effort into adding empathy to your toolkit, because empathy is hard to teach, but it's a core belief behind the art of war. When mastered, even the toughest situations can be changed with little effort. Taizong's wife. When Emperor Taizong first established the Tang dynasty, he grew increasingly frustrated at one of his senior advisors, Weizeng. On a particularly bad day, his queen asked him, "My emperor, why are you so angry today?" "You look like you are out for blood." "I am going to kill him. This Weizeng. Every day he ridicules and mocks me in front of others by constantly challenging the decisions that I make." The queen walked to the center of the room, took a step back, and bowed deeply. "Congratulations, my emperor," she said. "You are a very fortunate emperor. In all of China's history, only the wisest and most successful emperors have had advisors like Weizeng around them, people who are courageous enough to provide the emperor with honest advice." From that moment on, Emperor Taizong looked at Weizeng differently. He now felt that having him around demonstrated that he was a wise and powerful emperor. Later, with Weizeng by his side, Emperor Taizong became one of China's most powerful rulers. But you might also say that the real hero of this story wasn't Weizeng or Emperor Taizong. It was his queen. It was she who changed the course of history with one simple display. She figured out how to connect with the emperor because her words resonated deeply with what he wanted, to be a deeply respected ruler. Predict outcomes by understanding people. I've come across many people who read The Art of War looking for a kind of guarantee, something to help them avoid the unpleasant feelings of failure. Although completely understandable, it does leave me feeling saddened, because it's this desire for security that keeps us timid and fearful. My advice would be to be careful whenever you find yourself searching for this sense of false security. There are no guarantees in life, not in conflict, leadership, or anything else. And it's the same for me as it is for you, and even Sun Tzu. People have been trying to predict the future since the dawn of time, and will probably continue to fail miserably. Why? Because the future isn't a chemistry experiment where you get consistent results every time. Outcomes are unpredictable because people are unpredictable. You'll get different results depending on where something happens and to whom it happens, even though it might be the same event. There'll be differences in how people respond and how they subsequently decide to act. Every land has its own people and culture, and it's this unpredictability that keeps life interesting and exhilarating. Our foresight is limited. There's no way around it. The closest guarantee that Sun Tzu can give you is the promise that the best strategy will come from holding a mirror up to someone else. Base your strategy on how other people think and behave. The better understanding you have about the nature of people and how they think, the better you'll feel for the general direction of events. Sun Tzu says, when we know ourselves and when we know our enemy, we will find victory in each battle out of 100. And if we know neither ourselves nor the enemy, well then, we're just relying on dumb luck. When the philosopher Laozi was asked about the foundations of an empire, he said, an emperor to an official is like a father to a son. He was implying that there was a natural structure, order, and hierarchy to society. It's possible to disrupt that order, but it will eventually revert to how it once was. You know how parents somehow always seem to know when their child is telling them a big fat fib? They might not know what they've done, but they can sense when their child is acting strangely. There's no secret to this, other than a mother knowing her child better they know themselves. If we spent half as much time paying attention to others as a mother does to her child, we would be able to see the second and third order consequences of events too. Yes, we're unpredictable and different, but generally speaking, we do tend to move in the same direction over time. In job interviews, candidates might advertise their perfectionism as their greatest selling point. Would this be surprising to you if you were the interviewer? No, of course it wouldn't. But let's try a more subtle example. Let's say that one night we're at the opera and we're sitting somewhere in the middle of the orchestra seating section. You listen to the music, but you find it mediocre at best. The concert comes to a close and you gently applaud the effort of the musicians. But then you see the front row stand up. Then the second row stands. And then the third row, until it suddenly comes at you like a wave to the row where you're seated. What do you think you would do then? My guess would be that even though you're not particularly impressed by the music, you would feel compelled to give a standing ovation as well. This is the power of others to influence how we think and what we do. It's natural to feel a tendency, and even a responsibility, to meet the expectations imposed on us. And there's a good reason for this, because these norms make living in a society generally tidier and more orderly. But it will take some effort to figure out these general behaviors, because humans are the most unpredictable element in any situation. Nobel Prize winner Daniel Kahneman writes that we're predictably unpredictable. He says human decision-making is inherently noisy. We'll make different decisions and come to different conclusions even if we're given the same inputs and circumstances each time. We're like a bathroom scale giving different readings every time it's stepped on. There are no guarantees in life, but understanding the broader arc of what drives and motivates people will give us the best chance of knowing how things might turn out. If we step on the broken scale enough times, maybe we'll figure out the pattern of how it's broken. Don't fool yourself with what cannot be proven. For a book that was written over 2 millennia ago, I'm amazed that Sun Tzu managed to warn against something many of us fall prey to today: superstition. Superstition is a trick used to fool the innocent, and, surprisingly, there tends to be little correlation between the victims and their level of education or wealth. In the Song dynasty, General Daiking often used superstition to rally his soldiers. One morning, before leading his troops into battle, he told them that he was going to pray for victory one last time. He threw 10 coins onto the ground and said if they all landed with the same side facing upwards, the gods would be sending them a sign for victory. His soldiers, worried that it would turn out differently, begged him not to do it. "General, this is not the time to do this." "What if the coins don't all land facing upwards? That will affect our morale at this critical time." But it was too late. The general had cast the coins dramatically onto the ground. Can you guess what the result was? The general rallied his troops and left camp inspired and invigorated. After the battle, the soldiers returned and were curious about the coins. They picked them up and realized that the coins had the same face on both sides. Shaping beliefs is a powerful and effective device to persuade and influence. And it's a device that has been used by religion and those in power throughout history. Ancient Chinese emperors seem to have figured this out early in the game, relying on superstition and beliefs to coerce and subdue their populace. Dealing with natural disasters is a prime example. China frequently experiences drought and famine, and emperors were often worried that if these periods of suffering were to last for too long, citizens would revolt against the ruling class. Well, these emperors didn't know how to solve the drought problem, but they did know how to pray, and that's what they did. They performed elaborate rituals and blessings in front of citizens and ministers with the intention of bringing the rain. It showed that they were strong leaders, standing out there alone with the gods. I don't know whether the emperors believed in the rituals themselves, but they obviously didn't believe it enough to rely on their ritual alone. Instead, their secret was to wait. Every day, the emperor would ask his advisors about the right day to hold the ritual. On the surface, the advisors were searching for the most prosperous and fortunate day to maximize the outputs of the emperor's ritual, but in reality, they were waiting for a day when they could tell it was about to rain. They didn't choose a day that was sunny with clear blue skies. They were waiting for a day when humidity would be at its peak. Only then would the advisors tell the emperor that it was time. And when it did eventually rain after the emperor performed his ritual, he could righteously claim that he was the source of salvation. If we were cynical, we might think that this was a tactic the emperors used to manipulate or strengthen his control over the population. That could be true, and sometimes it probably was true. But I also think that some did it as a genuine way of helping people regain some comfort in a situation that was completely out of their control. If the emperor wasn't willing to step in to help them, then who else would? As leaders, though, we don't have the luxury of relying on beings other than ourselves. We can't put our faith in God's spirits and hope. We have to take responsibility for matters into our own hands because the lives of the people who entrust us with their well-being depend on us. Not to make it sound too heavy, but that's really how it is. Hoping for an outcome without taking the actions necessary to make it happen is laziness. Believing in superstitions and blind hope opens the window for others to fool us. We can only believe in what can be proven. Because, let's be honest here, we aren't as smart as our mothers would have us believe, and we're often deceived by what we see. In a rural village in China, a young girl was engaged to a man through an arranged marriage set by her parents. Fortunately for the girl, she found the man approachable and overall acceptable considering the circumstances, so she agreed to move forward with it. But suddenly, the man tragically died. Her parents didn't want her to be a widow for the rest of her life. After all, she was only 18, so they hurriedly arranged for her to marry the son of another close friend of theirs. Unfortunately, the second man also died before they could marry. This time, her parents were angry. They blamed her and told her she had a hard life. Her father shouted at her and told her that even the dog would die if she married it. In Chinese, a hard life is a term used to describe the circumstances of women who brought to their family death and misfortune. In truth, though, it was often used to oppress and blame women. The young girl was depressed and contemplated suicide. Was it her fault? Why were her future husbands dying if it wasn't her? One afternoon, she found herself standing by a river, watching the water gush by. A man spotted her from a distance and yelled out to her, worried. She told him her story, but he didn't look fazed at all. He told her that if what she said was true, she should marry him because he also had several wives pass away. He wasn't afraid of her hard life. Like all other good fairy tales, I must end this story by telling you that the two ended up marrying and living happily ever after. I had to say it, but the ending of the story doesn't matter. Hopefully, you felt appalled at how poorly the young girl was treated by her own family. Sadly, I can't say that the girl's story was the exception to the rule. Many innocent young girls suffer or have suffered because of the beliefs imposed on them by communities and families based on superstition. That story was my plea to not take matters at face value. Looking below the surface is hard because it takes time, thought, energy, and focus. And when it comes to focus, humans tend to be some of the laziest creatures on the planet. Don't be fixated on what you see or what you believe to be the facts, because that's when you tend to focus only on what's most visible on the surface. When that happens, it's not other people we have to look out for. We have to look out for deceiving ourselves. Beware of what you're influenced by. In Sun Tzu's time, before the invention of paper, kids went to school carrying with them a plank of wood. When the teacher taught them new words or phrases, the children wrote it down on their piece of wood. When they had a break or finished class, they would carry the plank of wood around with them. They would diligently carry their piece of wood back and forth between home and school to finish their homework. It was truly a tough time back then. We're lucky that we don't have to do this anymore for school, but we do continue to carry around with us our own plank of wood. It's just that instead of homework, we write on it our thoughts and values. As we go about our day, we're constantly assessing what we see and who we encounter. We're constantly writing on our plank what we agree with, what's worth our time, and what we're offended by. This was Sun Tzu's metaphor for visualizing how people function. Amazingly effective, isn't it? As leaders, our challenge is to convince people that our cause and our mission are worth writing on their pieces of wood. Most people don't know what they've written on their pieces. They can't even read their own handwriting. The stimuli constantly bombarding our senses make it a nightmare to try and separate our genuine thoughts from what's been given to us as programmed code. We're constantly influenced by propaganda and religion. The pilots who crashed their planes into the World Trade Center towers in 2001 were willing participants. They knew what they were in for, but they believed in their cause and were willing to make the sacrifice. People can be so committed to what they write on their plank of wood that they would be willing to give up all sense of self and logic. But sometimes the fight for the limited space on our wood is more subtle. Companies are constantly trying to convince us to change our minds about their products. When we see ads about weddings, they're trying to convince us that we need that one specific brand of diamond ring to make the relationship with our future spouse perfect. They tell us that we absolutely need that one ring because it's the only way of adequately expressing our love. Deep down, we know it's not true. The diamond has nothing to do with the strength of the relationship, but do we have a choice? How many married couples do you know without an engagement ring or wedding band? Very few, I suspect, if any. And we focus so much on the effort and expense that went into the ring, we completely miss the point. It's what happens after the wedding that matters. Remember the commitment to a decades-long partnership? Please tell me I'm not the only one who feels threatened by this. The effect of advertising on us has become practically undetectable. It's gotten so bad that social media influencers are now required by law to put ad or sponsored on their posts to make it obvious that they're being paid to advertise a product. And boy, do they hate doing this. I hope you recognize, though, that you aren't immune to these effects. It's just easier to see other people make poor choices than it is to recognize our own. The silver lining is that by seeing these effects work on other people, we might gain a little insight into how we would behave as well.